Welcome to the Faith and Feelings podcast. My name is Taylor Joy, and I'm passionate about helping you untangle and honor your emotions, authentically practice your faith, and integrate both into your everyday life so that you can experience the goodness and delight that comes from living in relationship with yourself, God, and others. Thank you for joining me. Let's get started. We live in a world that moves at a breakneck pace. It's a culture that speaks the language of productivity, of getting over it and moving on as quickly as possible. But that is not a language the soul speaks or understands. As a therapist, and certainly in my own journey, I've witnessed how much courage it takes to slow down to the true pace of healing. It is almost always longer and more laborious than we expect. Healing asks us to notice, to reflect, and to attune to what's happening inside of us. And that kind of attention may be some of the hardest work we ever do. As we begin this new podcast series on why healing matters, I've been sitting with some words from Sue Monk-Kidd. When she talks about transformation, she says that real change only happens when we are willing to go the long way round. A longer, more arduous, more inward, and more prayerful route. Many of us come to healing with a linear mindset. We imagine it as a one-time event or a steady climb upward. But healing is far messier and far more complicated than that. It's nonlinear. It isn't a single moment of breakthrough, but a spiraling journey we return to again and again throughout our lives. So when we find ourselves circling back to the same grief, pattern, or reaction, we aren't failing. We're simply coming around the bend again, this time a little deeper, seeing things from a different angle. Staying in that spiral requires immense bravery, because if we're honest, our pain can provide a strange sense of familiarity and stability. We know our pain, and leaving what is known for the uncertainty of wholeness can feel like a terrifying risk. Recently, in my own journey, I've been noticing how much my understanding of healing has been shaped by the idea of God as a rescuer. I want quick fixes, on-demand relief that spares me from discomfort or pain. But more often than not, I'm learning that God's presence in healing looks less like a rescuer and more like a midwife. A midwife doesn't take away the labor. She doesn't stop the stretching or the pain. She stays. She witnesses. She reminds you that what you're experiencing is a birth, not a death. So today, I want to talk about the beginning of this winding process of healing. And to begin, we have to confront our own ambivalence and hesitation. By naming the internal landscapes we face, we can start to cultivate a more courageous and compassionate posture towards ourselves. So today, we'll explore 4 common responses, 4 internal walls many of us encounter when we step into the work of healing. The first response is this: it's too hard. Many of us hit this wall when we've been trying too hard for too long. We're doing the work. We've read the books and we've gone to therapy. We've tried showing up differently in our relationships. And yet, from where we're standing, nothing seems to be changing. In fact, sometimes it feels like things are getting worse. Healing doesn't bring immediate relief. It brings more awareness. And awareness can make life feel messier, not cleaner. As we slow down and pay attention, we begin to notice layers we didn't know were there. Old wounds surface, and relationships feel more fragile. Tensions and ruptures emerge, sometimes precisely because we're no longer numbing or avoiding what we once had to survive. What once felt manageable starts to feel complicated, raw, and exposed. Healing can be exhausting in this way, not because we're doing it wrong, But because this work asks us to return to places we worked very hard to endure, it invites us to feel what we once had to push through or ignore. And over time, that can create a deep sense of discouragement, a quiet wondering, if I'm doing all of this and it still hurts, what's the point? Often, this discouragement can spill over into our relationship with God. We may feel disoriented, unsure of where God is in this process or why healing doesn't look the way we imagined it would. There can be a deep weariness here, paired with grief for what hasn't changed, what hasn't been repaired, and what still feels broken. Hope begins to feel dangerous, risky, like something we can't afford to keep reaching for. And yet, this is often the very moment where healing asks something different of us. Not more effort, not more striving, not another attempt to fix ourselves or push through the pain. The invitation is not to try harder, but as author and therapist Andy Kolber says, to try softer. Trying softer doesn't mean giving up. It means loosening our grip on self-criticism. It means letting go of the belief that healing is something we must muscle our way through alone. It's a shift from forcing change to allowing ourselves to be met with compassion, with presence, and with the grace of not having to earn our way into wholeness. The second response is this: it's not necessary. Many of us learned very early how to present a version of ourselves that looked spiritually mature, functional, or simply fine. We learned how to perform faith in a way that was rewarded, ways that brought affirmation, belonging, and a sense of safety. In his book, The Deeper Journey, New Testament theologian Robert Mulholland names this posture the religious false self. This false self knows the right language, the right scriptures, and the right practices. It shows up to church, it serves faithfully, it attends Bible studies and prays regularly. It can say with confidence, I already know the right theology. I'm doing the right things. I'm okay. I don't need healing. The religious false self thrives on control. It is deeply afraid of exposure, of being seen beyond the role it has perfected. And healing poses a direct threat to that illusion of control, because healing asks us to dismantle the very structures we've relied on to feel safe, acceptable, and spiritually together. Mulholland says that the religious false self often uses spiritual language to avoid spiritual transformation. We can talk easily about grace, forgiveness, surrender, and trust, while resisting the lived reality of those truths. We become fluent in theology, but inexperienced in actually encountering God in our brokenness. Healing threatens the false religious self because it insists on honesty. It invites us to stop hiding behind competence and certainty and instead risk being known. And somewhere in that invitation, many of us begin to wonder, who will we be when the armor falls off? Will we even recognize ourselves? Sue Monk Kidd captures this beautifully when she writes, the spiritual journey entails confronting these hardened patterns that we've spent a lifetime creating, patterns that oppose the life of the Spirit and obscure our true spiritual identity. Overcoming them means allowing God to transform even our most prized illusions about ourselves. The third response sounds something like this: I don't know how. There is a deep longing underneath these words. This response is common for those of us who have yet to begin a healing journey, and we sense that there is something more, something deeper, more whole, more integrated, but we don't know where to begin. And so the questions turn inward. What am I missing? What am I doing wrong? Why does this still hurt? At this point in my own life, my prayer sounded like this: God, Will you please just fix me? I felt stuck inside my pain, unable to see a way through it. I wanted relief, clarity, and a clear set of steps that would finally make things make sense. But healing rarely arrives as a sudden breakthrough. More often, it begins as an education in listening. Healing is less about forcing change and more about learning how to pay attention. Learning to listen to your internal signals, your emotional limits, and your nervous system's cues. It asks us to honor the places in us that need pacing rather than pressure, gentleness rather than urgency. This kind of work unfolds through small, quiet experiences that slowly build a sense of internal safety over time. It looks like finding words for what you're feeling when everything inside feels tangled. It looks like noticing what helps you feel grounded and what sends you into overwhelm. It often looks like having someone alongside you who can help name what's happening without rushing to fix it. In this way, confusion doesn't have to be an obstacle to healing. It can actually be a starting point. Confusion is often the place where healing begins to move at the speed of trust, where the work shifts from trying to get better to learning how to stay present with yourself exactly as you are. And this is where we begin to understand why we need a guide, like a therapist, mentor, or spiritual director. Not someone to give us all the answers, but someone who can help us tune in and listen. Someone who can help us discern what our bodies, emotions, and stories have been trying to communicate all along. Healing doesn't require mastery. It requires companionship, patience, and a willingness to learn how to listen from the inside. The fourth response is often the most subtle. It's not possible for me. This belief is rarely formed in a single moment. It doesn't arrive as a clear decision or a conscious loss of hope. Instead, it settles in slowly, shaped over time by chronic pain, repeated trauma, or long seasons of unmet longing. This kind of despair doesn't announce itself. It whispers, healing might happen for others, but not for me. Gradually, something begins to close inside of us. We start to feel too broken, too complicated, or too damaged to repair. It becomes the quiet conclusion that my story, my wounds are somehow different, beyond what healing can reach. Despair like this is profoundly isolating. It convinces us that we are the exception, and over time, it shrinks our imagination for what might be possible, not because we don't believe healing exists, but because we stop believing it applies to us. So we stop asking, we stop seeking, we stop hoping. This numbness isn't indifference, it's protection. When we've been wounded again and again, the nervous system learns that vulnerability is too risky. It can feel safer to believe healing is impossible than to open ourselves again and risk another disappointment. In this way, despair becomes a shield, a way of conserving energy and surviving when life has already taken so much. This response makes sense. When the body and mind have endured too much for too long, they adapt in the ways they know how. And so if this response resonates with you, there is nothing wrong with you, nothing weak or broken about the way you've had to adapt. This fourth response is not evidence of failure. It is evidence of how much you've had to carry. And healing begins not by demanding hope, but by honoring the places where hope has felt too costly to hold. Taken together, these four responses, it's too hard, it's not necessary, I don't know how, and it's not possible for me, aren't problems to be solved or obstacles to push through. They are internal landscapes. They are the places we find ourselves when the invitation to healing first begins to stir. So as we close, I want to invite us into a different kind of posture, a way of being that I believe becomes the entry point to healing. That posture is gentle, courageous availability. You might name it this way: I don't have to be ready, just willing. Or as I like to think of it, curious availability to God. This posture doesn't require answers or certainty. It sounds more like this: I don't know how healing will happen. I don't know how long it will take, but I'm willing to stop running from what hurts and allow myself to be met there. This kind of availability echoes deeply in the work of Walter Brueggemann, who reminds us that a living faith depends on truthful speech, especially in lament. The inner life, he suggests, is shaped by the slow courage of telling the truth about our grief, our anger, our disappointment, our unmet longing, and our deepest fears. What we refuse to name before God cannot be transformed by God. Kurt Thompson echoes this same wisdom in his work on healing, reminding us that transformation unfolds as we learn to tell our stories more truly, with all of their nuance and complexity. We don't bring only the light, we bring the shadows too. And in doing so, we discover that naming what is real is not weakness. It is hard and holy work. It is the work of sanctification. I'm so grateful that you listened to today's episode. Thank you for spending time with me. I'd love to hear from you. Connect with me on Instagram @TaylorJoy or through my website, taylorjoymurray.co. Also, if you enjoyed this conversation, it would mean so much to me if you took a minute to subscribe and review the podcast. This is an easy way to partner with me and is invaluable in reaching new listeners. Until next week.